to have you guys here today. My name is Sandy Kearney. And I'm standing here because they can't hear me from the microphone. I can stand over there. So anyway, I'm the president of the Westboro Rotary Club. I've had the honor to serve over this last year and have the honor to serve next year as well. So if you don't know much about the Rotary Club, I would say come check us out. We're not what you think we are, and we love doing this kind of stuff. I own it's actually Human Power Solutions. I own a professional development company based out of Marlboro, so I facilitate for a living basically. And I've been in Rotary for about 8 years. And when I joined Rotary, I didn't really have time, but now I don't not have the time. It's pretty great, which is why I'm here standing in a dress on Saturday for you guys. And I love this community so much. Love what we do. I love what this community is. So I live here in Westboro currently. I have 3 grown children in their 20s and 2 grandchildren. So what we're really excited about today is that we are, this is a beta test for the Rotary International. So what we're looking at right now is the films that you're going to be watching. We've debuted once, but we're going to be bringing this around the country. So that's why the pre and the post surveys are so important, because we really want to get your feedback on these films. We want to get the feedback on the program. So be brutally honest, but be kind. That's all I ask. I know, right? It's hard. You have to ask that these days, though, don't you? So that's really important. And Rotary has 7 areas of focus, and the environment is one of those key focuses, along with the eradication of polio. So the environment has been a big focus for the town of Westboro, Sustainable Westboro. My friend Sherrod runs our environmental group out of the Rotary Club, and we do quite a bit here in town as well. So what we're going to be presenting to you today should be really exciting. I will tell you that I wasn't a big environmental person until I watched these films. They're pretty amazing. So I'm excited about that for you guys. So we have the great honor today of introducing Melanie Wallace. And I'm going to read from her bio because she has so many awards, it's not even funny. All right, so Melanie, she's amazing. We're honored to have her here with us today, and she's one of the producers of these films, and she just brings a world of experience in this arena. After several decades as a senior series producer for PBS's award-winning science series Nova, Melanie Wallace has launched her media production company called Melanie Wallace Media Strategies. She has produced and produced over 300 PBS Nova episodes. That's a lot. That's a lot. Her films have been honored by the News and Documentary Emmys, the International Emmys, the Primetime Emmys, the Columbia DuPont Awards, the Peabody Awards, and the International Documentary Association, among many, many others. To have her here today is pretty incredible, and I'm so honored to meet her. She's worked closely with some of the giants in the documentary industry, including Michael Ambrosino, founder of Nova, and David Fanning, founder of Frontline and Adventure, and Paula Apsell, Nova's longest-running senior executive producer. Her rich body of work spans from her first PBS producing credit exactly 40 years ago, which was Whale Watch in 1982, which I love Whale Watching, Melanie, to 2023 as the impact producer for Earth Emergency 2021 and Climate Emergency Feedback Loops. So please put your hands together and let's give a warm, warm welcome to Melanie Wallace.
Well, thank you, Sandy, so much for that. Kind words. Hello, everybody. So now you know I'm the impact producer for this series of films. And I would like a little more light. I can get closer to the microphone and there's no more light over here? Okay, excuse me for this. Not like I haven't said this a million times, but, okay. So, first of all, thank you very much to Sandy and to Westboro Rotary Club and Sustainable Westboro for inviting us and including us in your Environmental Action Fair. So, as a science journalist who worked for decades as the senior series producer at the PBS Nova series, I actually made Nova's first climate change film, Climate Crisis: The Greenhouse Effect, 40 years ago. And it was particularly exciting, given my background, to be asked to come on board the climate emergency feedback loop team. And just as a quick aside, in case people are interested, I recently discovered, to my surprise, that on YouTube, you can find my 1983 interview with a young US representative from Tennessee called Al Gore, if you're interested. But, okay, so the goal of the filmmakers, producer Barry Hershey, director Susan Gray, and senior producer Donnie Walsh, was to educate people about feedback loops. And what are they, you might ask? Feedback loops are the dangerous amplifying cycles that can lead to climate tipping points, those moments beyond which environmental systems and processes are irreversibly altered. And there are far-reaching and potentially dangerous consequences from those experiences. The team hoped that when people learned about feedback loops, conversations about actions that we can take towards solutions would take place. And that's what we hope will happen today here with all of us together. To make the actions we take to address climate change effective, it's critical that we understand the processes by which feedback loops and tipping points are created so that the interventions will be successful. To achieve their goals, the filmmakers decided stylistically to follow the words of climate activist Greta Thunberg, and her advice has always been, listen to the scientists. So the team interviewed many, many leading climate scientists about their work in 4 areas that the films are focusing on: forests, permafrost, the atmosphere, and the poles. Today we will be sharing with you 3 of the 5 films: the introduction, forests, and albedo. As Sandy mentioned, I joined this project in 2021, just after the 5 short films were completed and were about to have their worldwide Zoom presentation under the auspices of the Dalai Lama and the Mind and Life Institute. This Zoom actually provided the opportunity for the first time that the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg could meet and have a conversation, which was pretty wonderful. So following this first virtual event attended by 1 million people, we've had others, including with the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, members of the UK Parliament, and the Massachusetts State Legislature. In the fall of 2021, by personal invitation from HRH Prince of Wales, who you now know as King Charles, we were also invited to present the 1-hour version, Earth Emergency, at the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow, Scotland, known as COP26. Every scientist we interviewed has stressed the importance of talking about climate change. We have learned that even small conversations can have real results, and it is through dialogue with our loved ones that we can play a role in pushing change forward together. And we encourage you to share these films with friends and family and start having conversations and taking the actions we so desperately need for the survival of our planet, for the future of our children and their children. So that's what this project and today's event is all about. We hope watching these 3 films inspires you to watch the other programs, which are streaming for free on our website, where we also have discussion guides, and we also have science curriculum for grades 6 through 12. The films, by the way, are captioned in 31 languages if you're done with English and you want to see it in a different language. So I'm going to now say we're about to watch the first film, the introduction, and thank you so much for coming, and please enjoy.
Earth is warming, caused by the burning of fossil fuels like oil, coal, and natural gas, filling the atmosphere with heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, at levels humans have never seen before. As the world debates how much more warming the planet can take, 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, the climate crisis escalates.
The problems are that the world is becoming too hot for the present distribution of people, agriculture, human welfare, and human interest. And it's getting worse.
But it's more than our emissions heating the globe. Something else is at work here. The rising temperatures are setting in motion Earth's own natural warming mechanisms that then feed upon themselves. George Woodwell, a distinguished scientist and a lion of the environmental movement, has been sounding the alarm about them for the past 50 years. In a 1989 Scientific American article, he wrote that warming caused by human activity, rapid now, may become even more rapid as a result of the warming itself. 30 years later, climate activist Greta Thunberg repeated his warning, calling them irreversible chain reactions.
The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice.
So what exactly are irreversible chain reactions? What scientists refer to as feedback loops.
A feedback that everybody is familiar with is an audio feedback, where if you put a microphone too close to a speaker, you get this terrible high-pitched screaming. And that happens because the sound comes out of the speaker and it goes back into the microphone. That's called a positive feedback because it amplifies the loop.
Instead of the guitar, emissions from fossil fuels are the input which add heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere, raising Earth's temperature and setting in motion self-perpetuating warming loops. Warming as a result of the warming itself. That ever-growing screeching noise is an apt analogy for the damage that human-caused feedback loops are wreaking on the planet. Scientists have identified dozens of feedback loops already in motion. It's imperative that we understand them if we're going to solve the climate crisis. As the climate warms, forests, once removers of carbon, release it back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, or CO2. Frozen ground in the northern hemisphere thaws and emits CO2 and methane. These are the kinds of feedback loops that lead to further warming, triggering the release of even more heat-trapping gases and raising the temperature even higher. In this series, we will highlight 4 of the major feedback loops impacting climate: the melting of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean, increased drought and fires in the world's forests, the decay of organic matter from permafrost thaw in the northern hemisphere, and disruptions to the jet stream and our global weather. Each amplifies warming, and combined, they are spinning out of control. If we take action now, we could slow, halt, or even reverse them before it's too late. If we don't, the planet will reach a tipping point where we will lose the world as we know it. And what does that tipping point look like?
A simple example of that would be if you push a ball up a hill, at some point you're going to get to the top of the hill and it's going to roll down the other side. There are some things like that in the climate system where it's really hard to get it back once it's rolled down to that other side and now it's sitting in a new valley.
With more than 7.5 billion people on Earth, a change this great would spell catastrophe. Humans are well suited to the world we've known. The sun's radiation passes through atmospheric gases, primarily oxygen and nitrogen, to the Earth's surface. Some radiation is absorbed by the planet and the rest would bounce back to space if it weren't for a tiny percentage of gases like carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, and others that trap heat and warm the atmosphere. These heat-trapping greenhouse gases make up less than 1% of the total atmosphere, but they are essential in regulating the temperature. Without them, we would freeze, but too much of them would overheat the planet. Both are possible and have happened in Earth's geologic past.
So the kinds of things that keep climate scientists awake at night stem from their familiarity with the geological record that shows that the climate is capable of very abrupt changes. There are feedbacks operating in the climate system that may temporarily go out of control, if you will, and drive the climate to a different state. We cannot rule out that we may be in for such an abrupt change. So we don't fully understand them, but we worry about that a lot.
These radical changes include extreme temperature swings. During periods known as Snowball Earth, it got so cold the planet was covered completely in snow and ice. These alternated with hothouse climates, when virtually all the ice melted. Dinosaurs lived at the poles, where forests and swamps flourished. These abrupt shifts were caused by complex global processes. This is the first time that humans have been responsible for an abrupt change. Today, Earth would naturally be in a cooling trend, but because of human activity, it's not.
We know from paleoproxy records that the Earth has been cooling for about 7,000 years. We recovered from the peak of the last ice age, which was about 22,000 years ago, went up, and it's been slowly cooling until about the time of the Industrial Revolution.
At that time, humans began emitting vast amounts of carbon dioxide. Since then, the atmospheric content of CO2 has gone from 280 parts per million to over 400 today, and could approach 800 by the end of the century. Of all the carbon dioxide humans emit each year, oceans absorb about 1/4. Plants take up another 1/4, and the other half stays in the atmosphere, accumulating over time and raising Earth's temperature. But the percentage nature removes is shrinking every year as forests are destroyed and oceans warm. Scientists estimate that doubling CO2 from pre-industrial levels could produce an increase in temperature of up to 8 degrees Fahrenheit, resulting in the deaths of millions of people and the loss of countless species. It's this human-caused warming that's kicking off Earth's natural feedback loops and heating up the planet further. National Medal of Science recipient Warren Washington, a groundbreaking climate pioneer, began creating computer models in the 1960s to predict the future of atmospheric warming and the role feedback loops play.
The question always was, how do we see the feedback mechanisms working realistically? We really don't know if we got the right amount of feedback in our models, because they're so complicated in many cases. We had to do a lot of experimenting.
That experimenting, coupled with observations, paid off. Because of that groundwork, today's models have more accurately predicted what we're seeing today and what our future holds. This kind of research is crucial to understanding the policies we need to implement to avoid disaster going forward.
Climate policy really should be designed to avoid crossing the important thresholds, avoid crossing the important tipping points, and avoid setting off these important feedbacks. Because we need to essentially ask the question, how much warming is okay? Is 2 degrees okay? Is 1.5 degrees okay? We really don't know the answer to that very well.
And yet we continue to add more heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere, setting off irreversible chain reactions.
Where we are now is like driving in a car in a dense fog, and there's a cliff out there somewhere, but you don't know where. Do you want to be going 60 miles an hour, or should you be going about 10 miles an hour?
Today we have a choice. If we take our foot off the accelerator, stop deforestation, and regreen the Earth, we can reverse the feedback loops and begin to cool the planet.
And the solution is to make that transition away from fossil fuels and into a new green Earth. And it really does require a green Earth.
I'm encouraged by the fact that other countries have decarbonized their electricity sector in 10 to 12 years. So I know we can do it, and those countries that did it, by the way, grew their economies rapidly while doing it. But we have to put the incentives in place.
Even with meaningful incentives, it's going to take a while for the climate to recover.
Even if we stopped emitting carbon right now, it will take thousands of years for the system naturally to go back to what was before we started messing around with it. If we keep going industrially at the same rate we are now, we will have succeeded in roughly tripling the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere over its pre-industrial value by the end of the century.
We have the technology and knowledge to solve the problem, to stop and reverse the feedback loops. But we need leaders who understand the urgency of getting it done, and an energized public to advocate for change. It's not going to be easy. We've let the problem go on too long.
That isn't to say, though, that we shouldn't do everything we can possibly do to slow down our emissions, because we'll make it that much better for our kids and grandkids in the future. The problems won't be quite as big, the warming won't be quite as strong.
The Earth will be just fine. We may take along with us, unfortunately, lots of different species, but there have been catastrophic extinctions of species in the past. I'm not worried about the planet, I'm worried about us.
Every great change throughout history has come from the people. We do not have to wait. We can start the change right now. We, the people. Thank you.
Well. How was that? Melanie? Unreal. Nice. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, good. Oh, perfect. Okay. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about this film. This is an audience participation thing. I don't want to talk for 7 minutes. Okay? Guys, got it? All right. Tom, thanks for laughing. I appreciate it. So the film, it talked a little bit about taking our foot off the accelerator, to regreen the earth, to stop the deforestation. How long do you think we have to do that? What are your thoughts? Yes.
We should do it forever.
Forever, right? Yeah. We have to get going, right? How do you guys think that the climate crisis affects you today? You, the young people in the room, how does it affect you guys? Al?
More fierce storms and wildfires and
More fierce storms and wildfires, so more extreme weather? Yeah? Anyone else? How about the next, yes?
The peach and cherry crops here have been destroyed because of the weird cold snap effect.
Yeah, the peach and cherries, you said? And that cold snap in February? Right, so that's happening all over the country. We hear about that food supply all the time, right? Yeah? Anybody else? Yes.
It's getting hot.
It's getting hot. It is, isn't it? Do you like summer? Yeah. What's that? Like 100 degrees. It's getting hotter and hotter. So that leads to the next question. How about the next 10 to 20 years? If we're getting hot now and extreme cold now, What does it look like in the next 10 to 20 years? Worse, right? Right. So now, how many of you guys have ever heard about feedback loops before you saw this film? How many of you guys? A bunch of you had? That's great. I had not. Anyone who had not heard of it before? It's pretty interesting, isn't it? What are your thoughts, since you've never heard of it before? What are some of your thoughts? Someone that hasn't heard of it before, give me a thought. A tough crowd.
That's a tough crowd.
What's that? It's time to pay attention, right? I watched the films, and I watched all 5 of them, and I called Elliot, and I was like, wow, that was impactful, you know? It really is. So now that you know about the feedback loops, is a 50% reduction by 2030 enough? No? Back here, yeah? You don't think so? How come?
Because they're probably gonna still use a lot of coal.
What was that, Sue?
They're probably going to still use a lot of coal.
So probably still going to use a lot of coal, a lot of fossil fuels. Yes? Even after 50%, it's just going to keep happening? It's just going to keep coming back and coming back unless we do a hard stop, right? Yeah, yeah. And that's as you guys are growing up, right? So, okay. All right, great. Good discussion there.
I have a question. Can you go back?
I can.
It says, how long do we have? And now that you know about feedback loops, is a 50% reduction enough? 50% reduction in weed. Is that the United States? Is that the world? Is that the Northern Hemisphere?
I'm going to leave it to Melanie.
Because what I'm driving at is India and China are accelerating their use of fossil fuels more than we're ever able to cut back. And how are we going to stop them from doing what they're doing to the environment and literally causing all this stuff?
It's a worldwide effort, right? It really is.
So what are we going to do about China and India? They're allowed, from a global perspective, to do whatever they want in their country for the next 20 years. And I don't have any faith in what China will do after that.
It's a bigger discussion. That's a bigger discussion than I can't answer that question. I wish I could. I wish I could.
But we can certainly affect what we do. You know,
but it's not going to be enough.
It's going to be something, right?
Actually,
It's not enough.
That's not quite true because
It's not actually true about it.
50% of what is there.
The Paris Commission has? Yeah, okay.
I said,
a lot of countries who have signed up to the Paris Convention have actually vowed and are able to reduce the emissions. So it's also the developing countries like India and China. They have signed, and there are a lot of initiatives.
When I see it.
There are a lot of initiatives that are happening. When you go to these countries, you'll see solar farms. You will see a lot of things like even airports being powered with solar. So a lot is happening in those countries. And they have started manufacturing a lot more electrical cars. Also, EV vehicles are on the road.
Thank you. Awesome.
I was there in India and I saw it firsthand. So
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the next bit. We're going to actually
don't actually still contribute to by using fossil fuels in the life cycle of, for example, EV.
But they're stepping away.
So this is the kind of discussions that we want to have, but we do want to show the next film as well. So we're going to move on to the film on forests. Here we go.
"20 years ago, I started photographing our oldest trees. They can be 4,000 years old. Some are dying from disease, insects, lack of rain, warming temperatures. Never did I realize that within my lifetime I would be recording their deaths.
It's really astonishing in a forest the extent to which the trees produce a canopy that is fairly uniform, fairly dense. They parcel out the space up there among themselves as though they had decided ahead of time, you get this space and I get this space. They don't really think of it that way, but that's the way it works out.
Trees are miraculous in other ways too. As they reach out with their leaves and branches, they play a vital role in the health of the planet. Through photosynthesis, they help regulate Earth's temperature by pulling carbon dioxide, a powerful heat-trapping gas, from the atmosphere and emitting oxygen. Since carbon dioxide warms the atmosphere, by removing it and storing much of the carbon safely away in their branches, trunks, leaves, roots, and soils, forests help cool the Earth. In fact, every year, terrestrial ecosystems remove about 30% of fossil fuel emissions, and forests are responsible for most of that. But that percentage is decreasing as emissions increase, steadily raising Earth's temperature and threatening forests' ability to offset the warming.
We have warmed the Earth by a full degree and a little more, and forests are suffering increased hazards of fire as they get warm and dry, increased hazards of disease as they become vulnerable to insects, and dying as a result.
As trees die, they become part of a dangerous feedback loop kicked off by the warming. As the temperature rises, the climate becomes hotter and drier, and they fall prey to drought, fire, and insects. With fewer trees left, more heat-trapping gas remains in the atmosphere, raising the temperature higher, resulting in even more dieback. As trees burn and decay, the carbon they've locked away during their lifetime, what scientists call a carbon sink, is released back into the air.
It's entirely possible we reach a point where we're killing off forests much more rapidly than carbon can be fixed by forests. The net result then is to produce a feedback that's lethal.
Today, we have a choice. Allow trees to do their job and cool the planet, or jeopardize the forests we have. That's the path we're on right now. How we protect and manage forests will play a large role in determining our future. When it comes to global warming, 3 major forests matter the most: the tropical, the boreal, and the temperate. No forest is more critical for cooling the planet than the Amazon. Spanning more than 2 million square miles across 9 countries, this tropical forest has been storing carbon for millennia. Yet it is dangerously close to releasing more carbon than it absorbs. Mike Coe is the director of the Tropics program at the Woods Hole Research Center. For over 20 years, he's studied how deforestation in the Amazon rainforest affects the local climate and environment.
Tropical rainforests probably account for about 15 to 20% of all the terrestrial carbon sink, and the Amazon's half of that. So we're talking about a significant fraction of our annual emissions are being taken up by the Amazon forest.
But in the last 50 years, nearly 20% of this forest has been lost, mostly to slash and burn land clearing, triggering fires, insects, and tree dieback. This not only releases the carbon stored there, it jeopardizes an important cooling function of the Amazon rainforest. During transpiration, roots pull water out of the ground and release it as water vapor through tiny holes in the tree's leaves. creating a cooling effect on the surrounding air. In the Amazon, transpiration can cool the region by as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit.
When we lose trees in the Amazon, when we cut them down, what we're doing is we're shutting off that transpiration. So what you get is a drier climate. And the more you deforest, the drier it gets.
Over the past 2 decades, the dry season has extended several weeks, stressing trees even more and creating an ideal environment for fires to spread.
During extreme droughts, a huge amount of the forest burns. That turns the forest that year from a net sink to a net source of carbon. And we can do the math. If that happens 5 times in a decade, this forest is now a source.
Today, tropical forests are absorbing 1/3 less carbon than they did in the 1990s. Scientists predict that with the loss of so many trees, the Amazon could flip to emitting more carbon than it stores as soon as the next decade.
You can imagine that the climate's changing a little bit and everything looks just fine. But then one day, it changes just enough that the whole system flips over. You know, it's the classic frog in the water that you heat up. The frog's not noticing anything until it's way too late.
The next major forest at risk of tipping from a carbon sink to a carbon source is the boreal, encircling the North Pole through Siberia and North America. The largest forested region in the world, this vast coniferous expanse, stores an estimated 2/3 of all forest carbon, most of it locked away in frozen plant and animal remains deep in the ground. But that's changing. As with tropical forests, the warmer, drier climate here is making the trees more vulnerable to disease, insects, and fire. Brendan Rogers has been studying how boreal forests respond to climate change for the past decade.
Wildfires are getting worse across the boreal zone. We're seeing more and more large fire seasons, record-breaking fire seasons every year.
Unlike in tropical forests, the fires here strip off the insulating ground cover, preventing it from building up in between the frequent burns. Without this protective layer, fires reach further and further down, burning the organic matter stored in the soil.
About 75 to 90% of all the carbon stored in these forests is underground. And that is actually the majority of the carbon that's getting released from these fires.
The fires kick off a feedback loop, triggered by warming in the boreal zone. More fires burn carbon deeper down in the soil, releasing carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, heat-trapping gases that make the climate hotter and drier, leading to more wildfires. Like the Amazon, the boreal forest is going to switch from a carbon sink to a carbon source. Scientists don't know exactly when, but predict that at the current rate, it will happen by the end of this century, crossing a tipping point that the forest can no longer recover from.
We're seeing rapid change now, so rapid that the system is essentially not used to it. And the scary thing is not knowing where that tipping point is.
The temperate forest makes up only 1/4 of the world's forests, but it's our best hope, since the tropical and boreal forests are on the brink of becoming emitters of carbon. Once cleared for agriculture, many temperate forests in the US and Europe have made a comeback in recent decades. But in the southeastern US, old forests are being cut down by the wood pellet industry for burning, releasing decades of stored carbon back into the air. Even though these forests are being replanted, when it comes to offsetting global warming, old and young forests are not equal. Beverly Law has been measuring the exchange of both carbon dioxide and water between our forests and our atmosphere for the last 25 years. She works at 2 long-term testing sites that are part of a global network of more than 500.
An older forest has a lot of carbon stored compared to a younger forest. In a young forest ecosystem, there aren't that many trees there, and they're not taking up much carbon from the atmosphere.
Old-growth forests in the Pacific Northwest store huge amounts of carbon. Not only are they thriving in the wetter and cooler climate, these forests will be less vulnerable to climate change over the next 30 years compared to other forests in the western U.S.
If I were to try and mitigate climate change, the best strategy is when you have forests that have low vulnerability to climate change in the future, and they store a lot of carbon already, is keep those forests like they are, preserve them.
But unfortunately, these hardy carbon-rich trees have been prized by loggers for centuries. Redwoods that once towered over the Pacific coast are now mostly gone. When a tree is logged, 1/2 to 2/3 of the carbon it stores is released through decay or burning of the unused branches, leaves, and roots, as well as from the surrounding soil. Today, 17% of global carbon emissions each year can be attributed to logging and burning wood pellets for bioenergy.
In Oregon, of all the forest that was harvested over the past 100 years, 65% of that carbon has gone back to the atmosphere. Now, this is just the wrong time for that in terms of climate.
The warming atmosphere poses another kind of threat. Unable to survive the higher temperatures, many forest species are migrating north to cooler climates. But not all species can do this, and it takes time, which is in short supply. With the clock ticking, it comes down to how we manage temperate forests. Use them for commercial purposes, or keep them intact to cool the planet. While human activity has kicked off natural warming loops, human ingenuity could reverse their direction, turning them into cooling feedbacks instead. It would mean protecting and expanding forests, preserving marshes, grasslands, and all natural habitats. Using agricultural practices that store carbon instead of releasing it, and letting trees and plants do their job of taking carbon out of the air. This would lower Earth's temperature and kick in a self-perpetuating cooling feedback loop. George Woodwell was an early pioneer warning about fossil fuel use, setting off warming feedback loops 5 decades ago. He's convinced the solution lies with nature's own ability to cool the planet.
We can store carbon in life. If we want to be optimistic, we have to be very progressive in our transition away from fossil fuels and into a new green world. But it takes imagination, interest, and a recognition of the reality of an Earth that is failing at the moment. We can't allow it to be too late.
So the film explains that the forests are about to start adding carbon to our atmosphere instead of absorbing it out. So with a show of hands, who had heard of that before? Who had heard that the possibility of forests becoming carbon sources instead of taking carbon out of the air? Who's heard of that before? How concerning is that? It's pretty concerning, isn't it? You know, when you're thinking about the deforestation and as they're planting more trees, you know, does that still seem like, after watching this film, does that seem like a good idea? And I want you guys to wait till the microphone, you know, gets to you guys. So, what do you think about the deforestation and planting solution?
So, Melanie, is it good?
You're on, yeah, you're on.
I have question for you. So, this is a doomsday scenario in the two films that you have shown, and it's obviously concerning to all of us. My question to you is, did you see in the making of these films, did you see things that communities around the world are doing to counter this that gives you hope and encouragement, and actions that other communities could follow and learn and do that would help, alleviate this situation?
So first, I was not part of the team that actually made the films. I came later. And I think the people who made the films, of course, did and know what you're saying, but this was an opportunity to explain the fundamental science of how this works so that everybody will understand. And then, yes, solutions are available, people are using them, and that's the next conversation, but that's not the focus of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, great, thank you. So just from the audience, what could be more effective than carbon offsets that plant new trees? So what else could we do besides plant new trees? My microphone runners need to be up and walking around. Go ahead, sir.
That's a good question, because when you listen to things like this, it's easy to get kind of morose and unhappy and also do
I know, right? It's a little depressing.
There are things we can't affect, 10,000 miles away, but there are certainly things we can affect in New England. And as some of you may know, that in many of the public lands in New England, we do not have policies to manage forests for maximizing carbon. We often maximize it for harvesting trees or doing various things that we could change public policy, at least on the lands that are publicly owned, and try to educate owners of private forests to also do similar things. These are things we can do in our area, and these can be replicated all over the world, but it's got to start somewhere, and things start by seeing progress elsewhere. And I think we should, nearby, I'm sorry. So anything we can do to sort of encourage those kinds of things, which is partly talking to our legislators, our bureaucrats, and our friends to sort of get these thoughts in people's minds.
Great.
That change begins with us, is really what I believe.
100%. Sir? Yes.
Hello. Something more effective than carbon offsets would be to not stop, but cut down dramatically the amount of lumber we're using and find out other resources we can use instead of the lumber. As far as an individual person, I just struggle to figure out how I can send a message to these industries of what they're doing and how to prevent them from cutting more trees down.
The alternative woods is a good, bamboo is something that we could start to use a little bit more of. So there's definitely a little bit like different alternatives that we can use besides the wood.
Number one, the government is suppressing anti-gravity free energy technology. We do not need to, go to fossil fuels, nor do we need inefficient solar panels that can't provide enough power, to fuel the modern economy. We have perfectly clean, free energy tapping into the physical medium that underlies reality, but the government has been suppressing it because the oil companies own the profits and how to restructure the global economy. So we need engineers around here and people to stand up to the government and look into this free energy technology, and I have resources that, if anybody's interested. Number two, we need to get rid of these suburban lawns. They're an inefficient, form. Like I've planted what's called a forest garden, that's kind of structured on a natural forest. You have, useful trees at the very top, fruit trees and different trees for other purposes. And then below that, there's, different, plants, so it's a canopy, but it's structured like a forest, but each plant has a useful purpose.
Nice.
And so I see that as the future instead of a lawn that requires all these chemicals and is terrible for wildlife and stuff. So we need to find a way to work with nature as opposed to against it.
Great, thank you. That's the individual, right, doing some work. No mo me too. Okay, well, yes.
It said that the companies burn the wood to make energy. We could find new ways of energy like solar panels and like wind farms to do, or like the windmills to make the energy and use the wood that we have to make products that we actually need. instead of releasing more CO2 into the environment.
There you go. Yeah, so guys, so all those thinking. One more back there. See, are you stretching? Or are you? Yeah. All right.
1 minute.
Yeah.
I think we need to make the science clearer for a lot of people who aren't scientists. I think it's kind of a invisible thing that, the whole scientific method. So I think how do you make that more, demonstrated as clearly and as simply as possible, because science can be complicated.
It can get very confusing. So one of the things that we do have in the back for you guys, there's a QR code slip in the back, and it has a toolkit that you guys can take a look at on this QR code. Just some different things that you can do to help do your part with the environment as well. So great. Thank you for the participation on that. Okay, we are going to go to our last film and enjoy.
For tens of thousands of years, the delicate balance of Earth's climate has allowed human life on our planet to thrive. Today, that equilibrium is at risk as one of the most important cooling mechanisms, the albedo effect, or Earth's reflectivity, is threatened. At Earth's poles, snow and ice reflect up to 85% of the sun's rays away from the surface and back into space, helping to keep the planet from becoming too hot. But over the past few decades, this natural mirror has begun to break down as fossil fuel emissions raise temperatures, melt snow and ice cover, and reduce the planet's albedo. As the planet loses its ability to reflect sunlight, a dangerous warming feedback loop is triggered. The most alarming change is happening in the far north, where the temperature rise is causing the snow cover and sea ice to rapidly disappear. Don Perovich is a sea ice geophysicist at Dartmouth College. For the past 30 years, he's been documenting big changes in the Arctic.
There's always been this annual cycle. The ice grows, usually say for 9 or 10 months of the year, and then melts for a couple of months. What's changing now is the timing. The melting is starting earlier, the freezing is starting later. We have much less coverage every month of the year, particularly at the end of summer.
Global warming from human-caused emissions of heat-trapping gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and others, is increasing the temperature in the Arctic 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the planet. Warming is then amplified by the loss of albedo as the reflective ice and snow disappear, exposing the dark ocean underneath.
Say it's April and we're flying above the Arctic and we look down at the sea ice cover. It's covered by snow. It's bright and it's white. Now, summer comes, that snow melts, you get more open ocean, you're absorbing much more heat. Instead of reflecting 85%, you're absorbing 90%. And so you're replacing one of the best natural reflectors, snow, with one of the worst, the open ocean.
Now, instead of reflecting the sunlight, the ocean absorbs it, heats up, and melts more ice, exposing more dark ocean, which absorbs more sunlight in an amplifying cycle.
As those darker waters warm, they emit carbon dioxide and water vapor, warming things further. So there are several aspects to this feedback in the Arctic problem which are truly frightening.
Scientists have been measuring Arctic sea ice since long before satellites began taking reliable measurements in the early 1970s. By the end of that decade, the climate models predicted sea ice would begin to disappear with the increase of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere. Marika Holland is a climate modeler from the National Center for Atmospheric Research.
So our first climate models were developed in the 1970s. Those models, even in their simplicity, predicted that with rising greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we would see dramatic sea ice loss in the Arctic and the Arctic warming would be amplified relative to the globe.
And as measurement techniques improved, scientists were alarmed to discover just how much ice had been lost.
The volume has decreased by 75% in only 40 years. It's just a breathtaking change in a very short time. We call it the New Arctic now because it's so different from what it used to be. The ice now is mainly consisting of what we call first-year ice, which is just ice that's formed in that one winter, and most of it doesn't survive through the summer. It all melts.
Studies suggest that around a quarter of global warming is caused by the loss of this sea ice. But if you factor in the melting of snow cover on the surrounding land, together they account for an estimated 40% loss in the planet's reflectivity.
The snow cover over land is very bright and very reflective. It reflects an enormous amount of the sunlight away from the surface, just like the sea ice cover does. And we are seeing reductions in the aerial coverage of snow over the land, just like we're seeing reductions in the aerial coverage of sea ice.
With feedback loops amplifying the warming, the landscape of the Arctic will change irrevocably.
So our climate model projections suggest that we will lose the Arctic sea ice cover in the summer months altogether by the end of this century. If we continue to increase greenhouse gases in the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels, we ultimately will get to a state where we lose the winter sea ice as well.
A sobering prediction, considering that ice has covered the Arctic Ocean for more than 2.5 million years. And the warming happening in the Arctic isn't staying in the Arctic. The air there is mixing into the global atmosphere elsewhere on Earth and raising global temperatures.
The Arctic plays a very central role in Earth's climate. Even if you just lose sea ice cover in the Arctic, the tropics will feel that enhanced warming.
This means amplification of problems the climate crisis is already causing. Crops suffering, food prices going up, wet areas becoming wetter, dry areas becoming drier. And as the climate warms, it kicks in another feedback loop, set in motion by the melting of massive glacial ice sheets. In the past 30 years, the loss of ice on the Greenland ice sheet has increased sixfold, leading to a rise in sea level. As the ocean rises, the higher, warmer water melts more land ice, raising sea levels further and melting even more ice in a vicious cycle. In the South Pole, the increased temperature is thawing the miles-thick Antarctic ice sheets that have been accumulating on land for over 40 million years.
Loss of ice over the Antarctic continent doesn't have as much of an albedo feedback because it's so thick. But as that ice enters the ocean, it causes sea level to rise.
If both Greenland and Antarctica's glacial ice shelves were to melt, sea levels would potentially rise by more than 100 feet. This resulting destruction to coastlines would uproot millions of people around the world. It would also mean the ice sheets would reach a tipping point, taking thousands of years to recover.
If we lose an enormous amount of ice from the land, reestablishing that is a very long timescale issue.
And if we continue with business as usual, the warming of the Arctic will cause the feedback loops at both poles to spin out of control.
The models predict if we continue on the path we're on, that the Arctic will experience very dramatic changes and that those changes will reverberate throughout the system, the human system, the biological system, the socioeconomic system.
With every country contributing to the problem, each now needs to be part of the solution.
That requires managing the world in such a way that we do not exploit carbon compounds and dump the waste into the atmosphere.
The emission of greenhouse gases is an example of a market failure. One business enterprise passing on the real cost of doing business to people who aren't party to that business. That is, most of the rest of us.
In every sector of the economy, we have the technology and knowledge to move toward sources of energy that do not produce heat-trapping gases. What we need is the will. We must stop adding fossil fuels to the atmosphere, which are warming the planet, melting the ice and snow cover, and lowering the reflectivity of the Arctic. If we cut emissions, stop deforestation, and regreen the Earth, we can slow, halt, or even reverse the feedback loop. Lower temperatures, regenerate snow and ice cover, increase reflectivity, and heal our planet.
You have all this heat in the ocean. It would take a few years of cold temperatures to get rid of it, but once you did, you would get ice to form again.
The most important thing citizens can do is to educate themselves on this issue and vote for politicians who take this problem seriously and have good ideas for how to solve it.
I'm optimistic by nature, and I become more optimistic when I see so many people that realize there's a problem. The pessimistic part of me says the longer we wait, the harder it gets. It's time to act.
So there's been a 75% decrease in the bottom of sea ice in the last 4 years, and the rate is increasing. I want to ask a question. How can groups of humans help to decrease that sea ice from increasing? How can groups of people do it? Anybody? Shelley, got anything for me? Thanks.
Well, I think that the gentleman in the film said it. I mean, I think public policy and who you vote for matters, and action should not be preceded by inaction. People need to lead. We need to, and policy needs to reflect, whether it's at the local level, state, national level, and certainly, globally. Policies that reduce forestation, reduce emissions, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not a scientist, but I think the pathway forward is very clear, but inaction is not a pathway forward.
Yeah, and that, I think a lot of us, think that someone else is gonna fix it. That's just not the case, right? So just so you guys know, Rotary International is part of the UN. We have a seat at the table for worldwide, global, fixing climate change. So, it's not only government, but it's also community organizations, civic organizations. So just kind of keep all those things in mind as we have this discussion. So the sea ice is melting rapidly, right? Do you think it's connected to other feedback loops?
I have a comment.
Is it about a feedback loop?
Well, it's related to this problem.
Okay, all right, I got you.
All right. Well, if the main problem is fossil fuels, right? Okay, a big issue is the international economy and how goods travel, and that is an enormous waste of resources. So supply chains need to be localized. That the world needs, and I'm not suggesting a Trump-style nationalism. I mean, we are an international community, and we need to work together as a world, and we need to be more diverse, absolutely. But supply chains need to be localized as opposed to internationalized, and people, it needs to stop traveling or commuting to work as much, distance working, is contributing to that and make people be able to work from home, and that's helping so people don't have to commute to work. But see, if we make the economy more local as opposed to, having these international supply chains where goods are traveling over long distance, that would significantly reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are being burned in the environment and causing this problem. So,
absolutely. I mean, you're seeing it more. People are. We're buying a new house, we're getting chickens. I mean, it sounds silly, but that's like one thing, right? So people are starting to do more and grow locally and, go to local farms and get their food, right? So we see more of that, and that's absolutely something, so thank you for that. You know, what would a sea rise level of 100 feet mean in your geographic region? I'm gonna read you a quick stat, and I gotta read it, unfortunately. So currently, more than half of Massachusetts residents live in a coastal community. So by the sea levels could rise by 2 feet by 2050, and by 2021, by the year 2100, under the worst case scenario, researchers estimate that sea levels around Boston could rise by about 6.5 feet. Even major climate policies could push the sea levels up by more than 2 feet by the end of the century. Now, I grew up on Cape Cod. I grew up in Falmouth. And that would change the entire landscape of my childhood home. There's already a beach that we used to go to in West Falmouth that was Chappaquiddick Beach that you can't go to anymore. It was a beach that we went to when we were kids, and now there's no beach left. I mean, there's reality, right? So what do you think about, like, that's what Boston would look like if the sea level rises by 3 meters, 9 feet. What do you guys think about that? Yes.
It's not only where the sea meets the land that you have to worry about, it's along all the rivers, especially the rivers fed by the sea, like a lot of New Hampshire. I lived in another part of the world that experienced some very severe effects from the warming, from all of the whole cycle. It affects things, and it's disastrous. I mean, we've seen the news each year. There are more incidences around the world, so you know, we're way behind and we need to catch up. And personally, I think it's got to be from all the levels, unfortunately. It works best if it comes from the top, but since that's not really happening, we just all have to do what we can. So welcome to this fair, because that's the point, right? Find out what you can do at your level, and how you can change the kind of energy you consume and what kind of fuels you use to heat your home, etc.
Yeah, the more individual actions we can take, you know, the more people that take these individual actions, it becomes a community kind of event. So now what do we do? So you know, we have the cards that we talked about. So I want to just have a quick little discussion. You guys will be up with the microphones. What are you feeling after seeing these films? Anyone that hasn't talked yet? Tie-dye guy, what are you feeling after seeing these films? What's your name, first of all?
I'm Ben.
Okay, I couldn't call you tie-dye guy, sorry.
I feel discouraged, but optimistic. And I know that's a little bit of a paradox, but I feel in a way, I mean, just us gathering here today is exciting, right? We're all people who clearly care about this topic. I think the visual of Boston underwater is really jarring, and I think it's also important to note that we're pretty fortunate to live in Massachusetts where we are, but there are people around the world who are already dealing with their homes going underwater. And we see increases in global disease when that happens too. So there are a lot of issues interlinked here. If you have a chance, I recommend looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, researching that when you get home, because that's something that a lot of countries are working towards, especially a lot of low and middle income countries. So I think we all have a part to play, and I'm excited and hopeful that in the next coming years, we start to take this very seriously.
Awesome, thank you so much for your thoughts. One more thought? Anybody? There you go, thank you.
None of this is new to me. I've been following this for the better part of 30 years.
Okay.
So I try not to watch these things because it gets too depressing.
I know.
But I think one of the main things that I come up against when I'm talking to people is the financial argument. Oh, solar panels cost too much. Oh, heat pumps are more expensive. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And so we need to get people to change the financial thought about it's not just about what's coming out of your checkbook, but then every day you are burning fossil fuels, that damage that we just saw, you have to account for that in the decisions you make and the money you spend as well.
Yeah,
And we should have a carbon tax, but that's a whole other issue.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna have to make policy. I've got two grandkids, and I wonder what the world's gonna look like, you know, when they grow older. Last thought. Yes, sir.
I'd like to just add to that, and I'd like to maybe make a pitch for a little bit of compassion. I mean, when these changes, as changes occur anytime, various individuals get impacted. Their careers may go away, their jobs may go away, their industries, their friends, and this causes real severe pain. So we need to understand that as we make these kinds of changes, we've got to think about ways to help the people whose perhaps livelihoods, whether it was digging coal or doing something else, are forever changed, and help to find ways, because we may not be directly affected, but many others are. And it's an aspect that, well, the reason why some people resist this is fact is because it's going to change our lives.
Right.
So we got to be really compassionate about other people and figure out ways to help everybody.
People don't love change, but change needs to happen. So I show you a quick show of hands. How many of you guys believe that the world will reach a point where CO2 is no longer increasing in the atmosphere?
Would you repeat the question?
Sure, I will repeat the question. How many of you believe that the world will reach a point where CO2 is no longer increasing in the atmosphere? Right now it's increasing. How many of you guys think that it will reach a point? 1, 2, 3, 4? Why, Elliot? You have a microphone, so I asked you.
Whether we have anything to do with it or not, the world will eventually get to the point where the CO2 won't increase. Hopefully we'll be the cause of that, but we may not be, and eventually the amount of CO2 will decrease.
Okay, great. We have the technology, we know what the problem is. You know, are there leaders out there that understand the urgency of this problem, right? And how do we, influence them, whether it's in the government, whether it's social, whether it's civic, whatever that is, right? Do we have that power? And how do we have that power? What can we do as a group, as a small little town of Westboro? What can we do?
Engagement.
Hold on, grab the microphone.
I think engagement, awareness, spreading awareness, education, starting from schools, all the way up. Also, towns, local communities need to step up. It has to be done from the grassroots level. I know we always talk about top-down approach, but sometimes bottoms up is much better.
Bottom up is always much better. Top down is never.
Because it's more sustainable.
Yes.
And people have a lot of stake in it. So
right. So people, so hold yourselves accountable. What are you doing? And what kinds of things can you do, right? And so as you think about, what you're doing in your families, in your towns, share these films, right? I mean, there is solutions at the end. There's optimism at the end of each one of these films. There really is. I mean, it's showing what's actually happening. But share them. What actions can we take? Next slide. What actions can we take in concert with others that will have the greatest impact?
Cindy.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes.
You asked about how do we influence leaders. Obviously, politicians respond to votes. They don't respond, quite frankly, to letters or calls. They kind of respond to that. But they really respond when there's votes. So there's a group called the Environmental Voter Project. The executive director of that, Nathaniel Stennett, has done some amazing research that shows that people who are concerned about environmental issues vote at a lower rate than people who are concerned about other issues. And so the Environmental Voter Project has all sorts of campaigns they do around elections, phone banking, text banking kind of campaigns that we can each get involved in to make sure that those voters turn up at the polls so the politicians see that this is something they have to respond to.
Yeah. So I'll take our local politicians, the people that are local, do answer. They do answer letters. They do answer. It starts at the local level, right? If the local level is strong enough, then it bubbles up. Yes, Shelby.
So I just want to echo, for those of you who don't know, I'm a locally elected official here in Westboro as a select board member, and although not certainly I'm not a state official, et cetera, but we absolutely, I do, my colleagues do, and I've talked with certainly enough state representatives and senators. They absolutely do respond to and listen and want to hear the feedback. I think, candidly, we all get pretty frustrated at times, feeling like, does my little voice make a difference? And it absolutely does. So I agree with the gentleman's comments, by being involved in larger groups that are working and campaigning on different platforms, absolutely. But I would never underestimate the value of one-to-one interaction in your voice, whatever your voice is. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next slide here, we're going to go on to there. You learned about the risk of feedback loops, the tipping points, which I thought was pretty interesting too. There is a solution that does exist. Again, grab that QR code that I showed you guys earlier today and, download the toolkit, see what's available, for you as a person to help out. And then don't be stingy with the information. Shouldn't be the best kept secret, right? Share it with everybody and see what we can do together. I don't know if in our lifetime, I don't know, I'm in my 50s, I don't know what we're gonna see, but if we can start seeing some incremental, smaller changes, that'll be good for our kids and our grandkids and the people that are coming up after us. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about today. Anyone, how was today, everybody? I got like a side thumbs up over there. So what we'd like you guys to do, again, this is a beta project for the Rotary International. We are our Rotary Club. We don't get involved in politics. We don't get involved in all of that stuff. We're here just to do good. That's what the organization is all about. So internationally, we're in the UN and we have a seat at the table, but we're not on any particular side. Locally, we are very active in this particular community when it comes to the environmental. We have the Trex Thin Plastics that we do collections every other Saturday, and that is on our website. We do the EV fair at the Amazon Robotics. We co-sponsor this with Sustainable Westboro, and we're always looking for people that are looking that care about this. So whether you live here or in another community, there are Rotary clubs all over the world. Just whatever community that you're in, if you want to make an impact, that's one way to do it on the local level. So again, thank you for doing the pre-survey. This is the post-survey. So we're asking you guys to do the post-survey because again, if we can get your feedback, your honest feedback, that's nice, even if it's critical. We want to get that honest feedback so that we can just continue to improve and make this program even better for you guys. So on this gorgeous 80-degree sunny Saturday, I thank you so much for coming and for showing up and just for participating in this really important thing. Yes, sir. Hold on one second.
How to find these films in the future?
Absolutely. How can I find the films?
Okay.
Through the toolkit, yes.
There's also a brochure at the back with the links to all the films as well.
So we have a couple of pieces of feedback loops we have on the table there. We've got another flyer, and then the QR codes have everything in it. And I will talk with our Rotary Club to see if we can get the film on our website. So if you go to westbororotary.org, again, we would love to have you join us. Thank you so much for today. Melanie has one more thing she would like to say.
I just want to say that, I just want to let people know that this book will be coming out in June, and it is inspired by the Feedback Loops films, and it was written by the person who runs the Mind and Life Institute and works closely with the Dalai Lama. And the title is A Future We Can Love, and there are flyers on the back, and I just wanted to let people know about this.
Thank you so much.
So we want you to make sure you do this survey before you leave today.
Please.
We would really appreciate it. We just want to see if we've made any difference in people's awareness and opinion. Ultimately, I heard several things back from people during what limited discussion we did have. I heard depressing. I heard this looks like a lot of doom. And the whole point of this was not to leave you there, but for you to be able to access these resources, because ultimately what this was for was to get you, to motivate you to action. So many of the kinds of things we hear in the news talk about, well, by 2030, that was back in 2015 in the Kyoto Accords, well, by 2030, oh, well, we really need to get to someplace in 2050. Well, when it comes time to voting today, and you're looking at your economic situation, or you're looking at the housing situation, or you're looking at the immigration situation, it's really hard to balance that against something that's going to happen in 2050. So we hope by spreading the kind of information we have today makes you aware it may not be 2050. As you see, these feedback loops are extremely complicated. And all the models that have been done that says, well, we have until then, they may be wrong. It may happen a lot sooner than they think. And there may be more feedback loops that we don't even know about yet. So the whole point is to get you to raise the priority that we deal with climate change. So when in Congress they say, well, we don't know about the debt ceiling. Maybe if you drop that program that fights climate change, we could save that money, and then we'll raise the debt ceiling. Well, that's unacceptable. That's not something we can afford to do. What we need is to spend more on climate change, even if we have to alter the priorities and spend less on something else we care about. So if I said today, I want everybody in this room to tell their neighbors, and I want everybody to gather and plan for 10 million people to march to Washington and tell them we want to do something. That's the kind of action that would get some change, right? If politicians really knew that millions of people cared about this, that would move the needle. And that's really why we want to do this on a larger scale globally. And we believe the problem can be solved, but it can only be solved with the aid of bigger organizations than us. I could buy a heat pump. I can go in there and find the greatest heat pump in the room across the street. But without government action to amplify that, we're not going to get the kind of changes we absolutely need. So hopefully we've moved it.
So the takeaway from all this is that we should really all be ambassadors and talk about this in our circles and communities and all that. The whole idea of doing this is to spread the word and make people aware. Obviously, legislative action is one of the more important aspects of it. But our next program, in the next few sessions, we're going to talk about things that people have done and people can do in order to do our little part in making the small changes. My favorite comment on this is every small gesture matters, and that's really the most important. So our next session is there's a group of middle school students who are they're a panel. This is going to be a panel discussion, and they're going to talk about different environmental issues from their perspective. And so I'd encourage you to stay and watch this and see the perspective of the students and what ideas they bring forth and the way they present them. So I'm really excited about it. So let's see the next few sessions, and please stick around and see what they have to offer.
Thank you, Sharat. Just before we break, I'd like to, on behalf of our whole team, thank Melanie Wallace for the countless hours that she spent with us as we put this together. I can't tell you how many Zoom meetings that we've been in together, but if it wasn't for her passion and her knowledge and her commitment to this wouldn't have happened. So thank you, Melanie.
Awesome, so we're off. Please visit the exhibitor booths. They're open 1 to 4 today, and come back for the panel. And thank you again so very much. westboroRotary.org if you want to get involved locally. We'd love to have you.
Turn up the polls so the politicians see that this is something they have to respond to.
Yeah, so I'll take our local politicians, the people that are local, do answer. They do answer those. They do answer. It starts at the local level, right? If the local level is strong enough, then it bubbles up. Yes, Shelby.
So I just want to echo, for those of you who don't know, I'm a locally elected official here in Westboro as a select board member, and although not certainly I'm not a state official, et cetera, but we absolutely, I do, my colleagues do, and I've talked with certainly enough state representatives and senators. They absolutely do respond to and listen and want to hear the feedback. I think, candidly, we all get pretty frustrated at times, feeling like, does my little voice make a difference? And it absolutely does. So I agree with gentlemen's comments, by being involved in larger groups that are working and campaigning on different platforms, absolutely. But I would never underestimate the value of one-to-one interaction in your voice, whatever your voice is. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next slide here, we're going to go on to there. You learned about the risk of feedback loops, the tipping points, which I thought was pretty interesting too. There is a solution that does exist. Again, grab that QR code that I showed you guys earlier today, and download the toolkit, see what's available, for you as a person to help out, and then don't be stingy with the information. Shouldn't be the best kept secret, right? Share it with everybody, and see what we can do together. I don't know if in our lifetime, I don't know, I'm in my 50s, I don't know what we're gonna see, but if we can start seeing some incremental, smaller changes, that'll be good for our kids and our grandkids and the people that are coming up after us. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about today. Anyone, how was today, everybody? I got like a side thumbs up over there. So what we'd like you guys to do, again, this is a beta project for the Rotary International. We are our Rotary Club. We don't get involved in politics. We don't get involved in all of that stuff. We're here just to do good. That's what the organization is all about. So internationally, we're in the UN, and we have a seat at the table, but we're not on any particular side. Locally, we are very active in this particular community when it comes to the environmental. We have the Trex Thin Plastics that we do collections every other Saturday, and that is on our website. We do the EV fair at the Amazon Robotics. We co-sponsor this with Sustainable Westboro, and we're always looking for people that are looking that care about this. So whether you live here or in another community, there are Rotary clubs all over the world. Just whatever community that you're in, if you want to make an impact, that's one way to do it on the local level. So again, thank you for doing the pre-survey. This is the post-survey. So we're asking you guys to do the post-survey because again, if we can get your feedback, your honest feedback, that's nice, even if it's critical. We want to get that honest feedback so that we can just continue to improve and make this program even better for you guys. So on this gorgeous 80-degree sunny Saturday, I thank you so much for coming and for showing up and just for participating in this really important thing. Yes, sir. Hold on one second.
How to find these films in the future?
Absolutely. How can I find films?
Okay.
Through the toolkit, yes.
There's also a brochure at the back with the links to all the films as well.
So we have a couple of pieces of feedback loops we have on the table there. We've got another flyer, and then the QR codes have everything in it. And I will talk with our Rotary Club to see if we can get the film on our website. So if you go to westboroughrotary.org, again, we would love to have you join us. Thank you so much for today. Melanie has one more thing she would like to say.
I just want to say that, I just want to let people know that this book will be coming out in June, and it is inspired by the Feedback Loops films, and it was written by the person who runs the Mind and Life Institute and works closely with the Dalai Lama. And the title is A Future We Can Love, and there are flyers on the back, and I just wanted to let people know about this.
Thank you so much.
So we want you to make sure you do this survey before you leave today.
Please.
We would really appreciate it. We just want to see if we've made any difference in people's awareness and opinion. Ultimately, I heard several things back from people during what limited discussion we did have. I heard depressing. I heard this looks like a lot of doom. And the whole point of this was not to leave you there, but for you to be able to access these resources, because ultimately what this was for was to get you, to motivate you to action. So many of the kinds of things we hear in the news talk about, well, by 2030, that was back in 2015 in the Kyoto Accords, well, by 2030, well, we really need to get to someplace in 2050. Well, when it comes time to voting today, and you're looking at your economic situation, or you're looking at the housing situation, or you're looking at the immigration situation, it's really hard to balance that against something that's going to happen in 2050. So we hope by spreading the kind of information we have today makes you aware it may not be 2050. As you see, these feedback loops are extremely complicated. And all the models that have been done that says, well, we have until then, they may be wrong. It may happen a lot sooner than they think. And there may be more feedback loops that we don't even know about yet. So the whole point is to get you to raise the priority that we deal with climate change. So when in Congress they say, well, we don't know about the debt ceiling, maybe if you drop that program that fights climate change, we could save that money, and then we'll raise the debt ceiling. Well, that's unacceptable. That's not something we can afford to do. What we need is to spend more on climate change, even if we have to alter the priorities and spend less on something else we care about. So if I said today, I want everybody in this room to tell their neighbors, and I want everybody to gather and plan for 10 million people to march to Washington and tell them we want to do something. That's the kind of action that would get some change, right? If politicians really knew that millions of people cared about this, that would move the needle. And that's really why we want to do this on a larger scale globally. And we believe the problem can be solved, but it can only be solved with the aid of bigger organizations than us. I could buy a heat pump. I could go in there, find the greatest heat pump in the room across the street. But without government action to amplify that, we're not going to get the kind of changes we absolutely need. So hopefully we've moved it.
So the takeaway from all this is that we should really all be ambassadors and talk about this in our circles and communities and all that. The whole idea of doing this is to spread the word and make people aware. Obviously, legislative action is one of the more important aspects of it. But our next program, in the next few sessions, we're going to talk about things that people have done and people can do in order to do our little part in making the small changes My favorite comment on this is every small gesture matters, and that's really the most important. So our next session is there's a group of middle school students who are going to, they are a panel, this is going to be a panel discussion, and they're going to talk about different environmental issues from their perspective. And so I'd encourage you to stay and watch this and see the perspective of the students and what ideas they bring forth and the way they present them. So I'm really excited about it. So let's see the next few sessions, and please stick around and see what they have to offer.
Thank you, Sharat. Just before we break, I'd like to, on behalf of our whole team, thank Melanie Wallace for the countless hours that she spent with us as we put this together. I can't tell you how many Zoom meetings that we've been in together, but if it wasn't for her passion and her knowledge and her commitment to this wouldn't have happened. So thank you, Melanie.
Awesome, so we're off. Please visit the exhibitor booths. They're open 1 to 4 today, and come back for the panel. And thank you again so very much. westboroRotary.org if you want to get involved locally. We'd love to have you.